Are e-bikes safe? That's been a recent question, especially since one big manufacturer has told us that their e-bikes are not safe. I have 3 bikes in the garage that prove that point, that I can't ride at the moment. And that's got me thinking, what really makes an e-bike safe? And how am I going to know if it's safe? And what I'm really talking about is that sleeping sort of risk that we can't see very much, and that's the battery. It's usually hidden away, and oftentimes if we're not pulling it from the bike, we're not even looking at it. So in this video, I'm going to compare 3 batteries that I have here in front of me from my 3 different bikes, and tell you a little bit about how you can determine if your current e-bike is safe. If you're planning to buy an e-bike, what you can do to determine if that bike is safe. So I can only think of one item on our mountain bike that is on its own a risk without us getting on the bike or riding it. Of course, we present our own risks when riding, but we don't often think about the bike being a risk when it's just sitting in our garage. And I didn't think much about that until the manufacturer Canyon, which makes 3 of the bikes that are in my garage, sent me a note recently telling me that your bike might explode in the garage. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but what they did say was that they felt the battery was at too much of a risk for you to ride your bike at this moment. If you want to see my videos that I discuss this in more detail, I'll put a link to it right here. But suffice it to say, it really got me thinking about the safety of the batteries in our e-bike. So I'm going to go over battery safety now, but before I do, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a like, and telling your friends about it. It's really the only thing that gets YouTube to promote these videos, and the only way we can get the message out there about the safety of these e-bikes. I don't just cover safety on my channels, I cover everything related to mountain biking, in particular e-biking. Just this happens to be a hot topic at the moment, and I want to make sure it's covered fully. So you can't really talk about e-bike safety and battery safety without bringing up New York City. For this past several years, the New York City Fire Department has seen a big increase in e-bike fires, in particular fires that caused fires within a structure that they were stored in. And over the last couple of years, they recorded over 150 fires per year. And it was this that got them to work with UL to identify and create a standard that e-bikes could follow to ensure their safety. The standard is UL 2849, and it covers e-bikes in particular and the batteries that are within those e-bikes, not only during the transportation of the bike, but also while riding it, which is important for us because that's where we're starting to see some of the failures. So New York made it a requirement for anybody to sell, lease, rent, or distribute a bike in New York to have that standard or have that testing standard applied to their bike and certify their bike under the UL 2849 certification. Now at the moment it seems only New York City is applying this requirement, although I've seen articles where the UK is considering it, although they have some of their own standards. UL 2849 appears to be the most stringent that we have out there at the moment. There are 3 standards that cover e-bike safety. One that you will see printed on some of these batteries. In fact, if it's not printed on any of these batteries, I have 3 batteries here in front of me. I'm going to go over them in a minute. But this one in particular is from the Canyon, and if you read it, it says that the standard that applies to it is a UN standard 38.3. That's really for the transportation of this battery. And if you think about these batteries being on airplanes or trains or cars, anywhere they're transported from the manufacturer to get to the point where it's on your e-bike, that standard is really required in order to make sure that the battery stays safe during that process. It doesn't cover it while it's in the e-bike. It's not tested for its application within an e-bike. The other standard I mentioned is UL 2849, and it is very specific to e-bikes. It tests the whole e-bike system, electronics and controls, and the battery while it's in the bike, while the bike is riding, and the battery itself alone. There are other UL standards that apply, and there are other tests that they do under 2849, but it seems to be the most comprehensive test for bikes at the moment. And any bike that's sold in New York City obviously has to have that certification. I checked, I found one manufacturer, Rad Bikes, which is a very popular brand, that does certify all of their bikes under 2849. But the unfortunate thing is they do not even advertise that. And the only reason I can think why they don't advertise it is they just don't want to bring up the topic of safety when they're selling their bikes. And that's unfortunate. That's something I think we need to change. The third standard is EN 15194, and it's a standard out of the EU. And it does apply to e-bikes specifically. It's probably better than what we see with the UN standard because it does look at the specific risks related to e-bikes, but it is not as comprehensive as the UL standard. And for that reason, I think most bike manufacturers, if they're going to have to go to the point of certifying these bikes, they'll probably be going to the UL standard. But be aware, there is a standard out of the EU that is 15194, and the UL also recognizes that as a worthwhile standard. So what do we do if we already have an e-bike and we want to know whether our battery is safe? Well, first of all, to make sure it stays safe, make sure you only use the charger that comes with the battery. I have not seen one battery manufacturer that allows you to use a different charger with their battery. And there's good reasons for that and the way the battery is controlled as it's charged. It is usually the manufacturer of the battery that produces the charger. And I know there are other manufacturers out there who make chargers that are called smart chargers that do some things that maybe these chargers won't, that could help protect the battery. But the battery manufacturer recommends you only use the charger that comes with it. Second thing you can do is you can pull the battery out and look at it. Now, that may not be an easy thing to do, but it's worthwhile doing. The two things to look out for are, one, something Canyon told us about these batteries, is there any cracking? Because these battery housings are the only thing that protect the battery from the internals. And the internals aren't meant to have moisture around them. And if they do, it could cause a problem. So you want to check the battery for cracking. The other thing you can do, and this is for any electronic component, is look if there's any kind of bulging taking place. So if you see swelling of the battery, maybe you can't even get the battery out of your bike because of it. That would be unfortunate. But if there's any swelling, that's a sign that you do not want to be using that battery anymore. Now, obviously, if you're using the bike and you see sparks, any kind of smoke, you smell something, stop using it immediately. If it's being charged, stop charging it immediately. And at that point, I would say get the bike into a place that's safe if it does catch fire. Now, what do we do if we're buying an e-bike and we want to make sure that the battery is safe? Well, right now, battery manufacturers are not, for the most part, following the UL standards. You really can't go off of that. You can look at the labels on the battery. I would suggest pulling the battery out, or have the dealer or the bike shop, or even if you're buying it online, when you get it, pull it apart and look at the battery and see what the safety listings are on it. You're likely only going to see UN 38.3 because that is what everybody has to comply with. I have very rarely have not seen myself, a battery that has the UL 2849 listing on it. But I'm going to go through these batteries and say, okay, beyond that, what can we do to see if these batteries are safe? And I'm going to compare these three batteries. This one here, we know isn't safe, so it's pretty easy for me to tell you why, because they've told us the problems that it's had with it. But and now my background is a mechanical engineer, so I do have some knowledge on what creates a good structure. And one thing I can tell you, and most of these batteries are long in a shape like this, is the weakest point of a longitudinal structure, a tube or even a square tube, is along this axis, the longer axis, the longitudinal axis. And it's a physics reason. The amount of material around the hoop of this enclosure is double the material resisting expansion than the amount of material along this edge and this edge, keeping it from pulling apart. So the weakest point on a structure like this is in this direction. So if you have a battery like this that has a seam up and down the longitudinal axis and it's screwed together like this, and perhaps it has really sharp edges to it, that is going to be a weak structure if this case isn't very thick. This case isn't very thick. So in retrospect, it's very easy to see why this would perhaps be the weakest battery that I have on this table. The other thing that's a challenge with this battery is they've put a lot of penetrations into it. So there's a button here that turns the battery on and off, and then there's a location here where there's a indicator of the battery level, and that penetrates this case, and so that's another weak point. The whole case also has integrated charging port and a bunch of shapes to it on the front and the back that are kind of in this longitudinal axis that would create weaknesses. So that is a weak battery. Of the three I have here, this is the worst, and it's the one that's been recalled. Again, easy for me to say. This next battery I like. It's from my YT. I've shown this on my other videos briefly, but if you look at it, I mean, this is a much more solid case. It's more like an ABS material. Kind of hard to see on the video, but this material on this Canyon is more like what you'd see on a toy. It's a very brittle plastic. This is a more durable, a tougher material, and there is no seam along the longitudinal axis of this battery. The battery case on this side is actually, and they say that the case that encloses all the batteries is the skid plate on the front of the frame. And so you can tell that's made a little thicker. And so it's a pretty durable case. Now, there is still a on-off button and indicator light. So there's a penetration in this case right here. So that could be a weak point. But the batteries themselves were slid into this tube that does not have a longitudinal seam. So that's a much better structure. Last one I'm going to show you is the one I think is the best. And it has all the components or the physical aspects of the YT battery, but it's an aluminum case. And this is made by TQ. Came out of my truck. TQ Motors is a manufacturer out of Germany that also made this battery. And I've looked at they actually sent me their safety information on this battery at my request. And it is made in-house. The only penetrations into this cylinder are from the end. That's where they slid the batteries in. You can see even the indicator lights on this are on the end cap. It's screwed together from the ends, and the material is aluminum. Actually has these grooves in it, which will make it a little bit stiffer. But aluminum itself is a much tougher material, meaning it's resilient to stretching or bending. It's won't fracture easily. And so even as a pretty light material, light wall thickness, I think this is going to hold up better than any of those other two. And it turns out the UL 2849 standard actually requires a metal case, from what I can tell. So this may be the best candidate for UL 2849 listing. As I implied earlier, the thing that's frustrating the most about this situation, I think, is that manufacturers are avoiding talking about the risks of battery failure. And they do that by sometimes not even telling you what their safety certifications are, because it just brings the topic up. And Rad Bikes, as I mentioned earlier, is a perfect example of that. They've got UL 2849 listing, and they're not even telling you on their website, unless you really dig deep, that they have it. So my request of you, bicycle manufacturers and battery manufacturers, is tell us what your safety certification is on the batteries. I think many more of us are going to start to wonder and start to ask the question. And the sooner you tell us what you're doing to make them safe, and the sooner you do more to make them safe, the sooner we're going to buy your bikes versus somebody else's. We're waiting on Canyon to tell us what they're going to do to replace this battery. I'm hoping it is UL 2849 certified. I'm not going to hold my breath. If it's not, I'm hoping that it comes to at least the quality of this TQ battery. Until then, I think the most we can do is get the word out. As I mentioned before, please subscribe to my channel. I cover all things, but I am covering the safety of these batteries here for the next couple of months while we wait for some of these things to be addressed. And so you can follow that. And your subscriptions, your thumbs up, your questions, your comments may be seen by manufacturers. I will be definitely getting the word out, and it will definitely get this video more out there more and in front of people, in front of buyers like you, and in front of manufacturers that make things like this. So thank you for watching. And